Most people think hitting rock bottom is the worst thing that can happen to you. But I discovered it's actually the best gift life can give. 3 years ago, I was spiraling through the same destructive patterns that trap millions of people every day. You know the cycle. Making the same mistakes, sabotaging your own progress, watching opportunities slip away while feeling completely powerless to change. Research shows that 92% of people who set goals to break destructive habits fail within the first 3 months. Not because they lack willpower, but because they're fighting the wrong battle entirely. The philosophy that saved me didn't come from a self-help guru or expensive therapy. It came from an ancient Stoic principle that most people completely misunderstand. This single mindset shift transformed how I approached every challenge, relationship, and decision in my life. Within 6 months, I had rebuilt my career, healed damaged relationships, and developed an unshakable sense of inner peace that still guides me today. In the next 12 minutes, I'll show you exactly how this philosophy works and give you 3 specific techniques you can start using immediately. By the end of this video, you'll have a practical framework for breaking any destructive pattern and creating lasting change in your life. Part 1. The Addiction Aikido Method. 3 years ago, I was about to throw my phone across the room in frustration. For the 100th time that month, I'd failed to resist checking social media when I should have been working. The harder I fought against these urges, the stronger they seemed to become. That's when I discovered something that completely changed my approach to self-control, and it might surprise you. What if I told you that the reason you keep failing at breaking bad habits isn't because you lack willpower, but because you're using willpower entirely wrong? Most people approach destructive urges like they're fighting a war. But what if the secret was to stop fighting altogether? This first technique out of 7 life-changing strategies is called the Addiction Aikido Method, and it's based on a principle that goes against everything you've been taught about self-control. Instead of building walls against your destructive impulses, you're going to learn how to redirect their energy like a master martial artist. Here's what most people don't understand about the human brain. When you tell yourself, "Don't think about chocolate cake," what happens? Your brain immediately creates a vivid image of chocolate cake. Neuroscientists call this the rebound effect, and it's why suppression strategies fail so spectacularly. The act of resistance actually strengthens the neural pathway you're trying to weaken. But Aikido masters discovered something fascinating centuries ago. When someone throws a punch at you, the most effective response isn't to block it with equal force. Instead, you step aside and redirect that energy in a direction that serves you. You use your opponent's momentum against them. Your destructive urges work exactly the same way. That restless energy you feel when you want to scroll through your phone, eat junk food, or engage in any destructive behavior isn't your enemy. It's raw fuel that you can redirect toward positive action. Let me give you a real example from my own life. When I felt the urge to mindlessly scroll social media, instead of white-knuckling through the resistance, I started saying out loud, "I notice I'm having the thought to check Instagram." This simple acknowledgement broke the automatic pattern. Then, instead of fighting the energy, I immediately channeled it into something productive that required the same type of mental stimulation like reading an article or organizing my workspace. The magic happens when you stop making your urges wrong and start making them useful. That anxious energy that usually drives you toward destruction becomes the very fuel that powers your positive actions. You're not suppressing anything. You're simply changing its direction. This technique works because you're working with your brain's natural tendencies instead of against them. When you acknowledge an urge without judgment, you activate your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for conscious decision-making. This breaks the automatic pattern that usually leads to destructive behavior. The beauty of this approach is its simplicity. You don't need months of therapy or expensive programs. You just need to recognize the difference between having a thought and acting on a thought. Every urge is simply information, not a command you must obey. Think about the last time you gave in to a destructive habit. I bet you didn't pause between feeling the urge and acting on it. That pause is where your power lives. That's where you can redirect the energy instead of being controlled by it. Your urges aren't going to disappear, and that's actually good news. Each urge is an opportunity to practice this redirection technique. The more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. Soon, you'll find yourself naturally channeling destructive energy into positive action without even thinking about it. But here's what makes this technique truly powerful. It doesn't just help you avoid bad habits. It actually helps you build good ones faster. You're taking the same energy that used to work against you and making it work for you. It's like turning your biggest weakness into your greatest strength. The next time you feel any destructive urge, remember you have a choice. You can fight it and probably lose, or you can redirect it and definitely win. The energy is already there. You just need to point it in the right direction. This redirection technique is just the beginning of your transformation. The next strategy I'm going to share will show you how to completely flip your relationship with personal change itself, moving from someone who digs through problems to someone who builds solutions. Part 2. Emotional architecture versus emotional archaeology. Here's a question that might make you uncomfortable. How much time have you spent in the last year analyzing why you have problems versus actually solving them? If you're like most people, the answer might shock you. I used to spend hours journaling about my childhood, trying to understand why I procrastinated, why I sabotaged relationships, why I couldn't stick to healthy habits. I was convinced that if I could just understand the root cause of my problems, they would magically disappear. I was practicing what I now call emotional archaeology, and it was keeping me stuck in the exact patterns I was trying to escape. This second technique out of 7 revolutionary strategies completely transformed how I approach personal change. Instead of digging through the rubble of your past, you're going to learn how to become an architect of your future. Most therapy and self-help approaches focus on excavation. They tell you to dig deeper, understand your trauma, analyze your patterns, and uncover the hidden reasons behind your struggles. But here's what they don't tell you. Understanding your problems and solving your problems are 2 completely different skills. Think about it this way. If your house was falling down, would you spend months studying the history of every crack in the foundation, or would you start building a new one? Most people choose the first option when it comes to their personal lives, and that's why they stay stuck for years. Emotional archaeology keeps you focused on what's broken. Emotional architecture focuses on what you're building. One keeps you trapped in the past, the other launches you into the future. The difference isn't just philosophical, it's neurological. Every time you rehash old problems, you're strengthening the neural pathways associated with those problems. Your brain literally becomes better at recognizing and creating those same patterns. But when you focus on building new behaviors, you create new neural pathways that eventually become stronger than the old ones. Here's the revolutionary part. You don't need to understand why you developed a bad habit to replace it with a good one. You just need to start building the replacement. Your brain doesn't care about the backstory. It only cares about what you're practicing right now. I learned this lesson the hard way. I spent 2 years in therapy analyzing why I had trouble with commitment. Diving deep into childhood experiences and family patterns, I understood everything about my problem, but I was still struggling with the exact same behaviors. That's when I realized understanding and changing are 2 different games entirely. The moment I shifted from archaeologist to architect, everything changed. Instead of asking, why do I struggle with commitment, I started asking, what does commitment look like in daily practice? Instead of analyzing past failures, I designed future successes. The architect approach is deceptively simple. You identify one specific behavior you want to develop. Then you design the smallest possible version of that behavior that you can implement immediately. No deep analysis required, no lengthy preparation phase, just immediate construction. For commitment issues, I didn't need to resolve childhood patterns. I just needed to start making small promises to myself and keeping them. I began with commitments so small they felt almost silly. I will make my bed every morning for 1 week. I will drink 1 glass of water before checking my phone. I will write 1 sentence in my journal each day. Each kept promise was like laying a single brick in the foundation of a new identity. I wasn't trying to fix my past self. I was building my future self one small action at a time. The amazing thing is that as I kept these tiny commitments, my capacity for larger commitments naturally expanded. This approach works because action creates identity faster than analysis creates insight. When you consistently behave like the person you want to become, your brain starts to see you as that person. Your self-concept shifts from, "I'm someone who struggles with commitment," to, "I'm someone who keeps my word." The beauty of emotional architecture is that it's forward-focused and immediately actionable. You don't need to wait until you've processed all your issues or understood all your patterns. You can start building the life you want today, right now, with the next small action you take. But here's the key. The behavior you choose to build must be so small that it feels almost impossible to fail. Most people sabotage themselves by choosing behaviors that are too ambitious. They try to build skyscrapers when they should be laying foundation stones. Your past doesn't have to be your future, but wishing for change isn't enough. Understanding your problems isn't enough. You have to start building one small action at a time. Every positive action is a vote for the person you're becoming. Stop being an archaeologist of your pain and start being an architect of your potential. The blueprint for your best life isn't hidden in your past. It's waiting to be constructed through your daily choices. The next strategy will show you exactly how to focus your building efforts where they'll have maximum impact, using an advanced principle that most people completely misunderstand. Part 3. The Dichotomy of Control 2.0. I used to lie awake at night worrying about things I had zero power to change. The economy, other people's opinions of me, whether my boss would approve my project, whether my friends would invite me to events. Meanwhile, I completely ignored the things I had complete control over, like my morning routine, my response to criticism, and my daily habits. This backwards approach to life kept me feeling powerless and frustrated until I discovered an upgraded version of one of philosophy's most powerful principles. Most people know about the dichotomy of control from ancient Stoicism, but they're missing the advanced level that changes everything. This third technique out of 7 game-changing strategies will teach you how to identify exactly where your power lies and how to use that knowledge to create emotional leverage in every area of your life. Traditional Stoicism teaches you to focus only on what you can control and ignore everything else. That's helpful, but it's incomplete. The real world isn't that black and white. Most situations fall into a gray area where you have some influence, but not complete control. And that's where most people waste enormous amounts of energy. The upgraded version recognizes 3 distinct categories instead of 2. What you control completely, what you influence partially, and what you cannot affect at all. This distinction is crucial because it's in that middle category where most people sabotage themselves. Let me give you a perfect example. You can't control whether you get hired for a job, but you can influence it by preparing thoroughly, dressing professionally, and communicating clearly during the interview. Most people make the mistake of trying to control the outcome instead of maximizing their influence on the inputs. When you try to control what you can only influence, you create anxiety and frustration. When you ignore what you can influence because you can't completely control it, you give away your power. The key is learning to distinguish between these categories and allocating your energy accordingly. Here's how this looks in practice. Take your biggest current stressor and break it down into these 3 categories. Let's say you're stressed about your relationship. You cannot control your partner's feelings or decisions, but you can completely control your own communication, behavior, and emotional responses. You can influence the relationship dynamic through your actions, but you cannot control the outcome. Most relationship problems come from people trying to control their partner instead of maximizing their influence through their own behavior. They focus 80% of their energy on what they cannot control and only 20% on what they can completely control. This is backwards and exhausting. The correct allocation is the opposite. Spend 80% of your energy on what you completely control, 20% on what you can influence, and 0 energy on what you cannot affect. This creates what I call emotional leverage, where you get maximum impact from minimum effort. When I applied this principle to my career anxiety, everything shifted. Instead of worrying about whether I'd get promoted, I focused completely on controlling my work quality, my skill development, and my professional relationships. I couldn't control my boss's decisions, but I could influence them by consistently delivering excellent results. The result was paradoxical but predictable. The less I focused on controlling outcomes, and the more I focused on maximizing my controllable inputs, the better my outcomes became. My work improved because I wasn't distracted by anxiety about results. My relationships improved because I stopped trying to control other people and started focusing on being the kind of person others wanted to be around. This principle applies to everything in your life: your health, your finances, your personal growth, your relationships. In every area, you have things you completely control, things you can influence, and things you must accept as outside your power. The magic happens when you get this allocation right. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstances because you're constantly exercising your real power. You stop feeling overwhelmed because you're not trying to do impossible things. You start feeling effective because you're focusing your efforts precisely where they have the most impact. But here's the advanced insight most people miss. The more you focus on what you control completely, the more influence you actually have in other areas. When you master your own responses, communication, and behavior, you naturally become more influential in situations where you don't have direct control. People respond to consistency and competence. When you demonstrate that you can manage yourself effectively, others naturally give you more influence in shared situations. Your sphere of influence actually expands as you focus more intensely on your sphere of complete control. This isn't about becoming passive or accepting bad situations. It's about becoming strategically powerful. You're not giving up, you're focusing your power where it can actually create change. The next time you feel frustrated or powerless, ask yourself, am I trying to control something I can only influence, or am I neglecting something I completely control? The answer will show you exactly where to redirect your energy for maximum impact. This strategic allocation of energy is just one piece of creating lasting change. The next technique will show you how to engineer your environment so that good choices become automatic, turning willpower from a limited resource into an unlimited one. Part 4. The Behavioral Recommendation Engine. Have you ever wondered why you can watch Netflix for hours without thinking about it, but you have to force yourself to read for 20 minutes? The answer isn't about entertainment value or attention span. It's about environmental design. And once you understand how it works, you can hack your own life the same way tech companies hack your behavior. Netflix doesn't rely on your willpower to keep you watching. They've engineered every aspect of their platform to make watching the next episode the path of least resistance. The next episode starts automatically. Your viewing history influences what shows appear on your homepage. Even the thumbnails are personalized based on your preferences. This 4th technique out of 7 revolutionary strategies will teach you how to become the Netflix algorithm of your own habits, engineering your environment to automatically suggest better behaviors instead of relying on willpower alone. Most people approach habit change like they're fighting against their own nature. They use willpower to force themselves to do things their environment actively discourages. It's like trying to swim upstream while Netflix is pushing you downstream. You might make progress through sheer effort, but you'll exhaust yourself in the process. The smart approach is to redesign your stream so that good behaviors become the natural flow. Instead of fighting your tendencies, you engineer situations where your tendencies work in your favor. Here's what most people don't understand about willpower. It's not a character trait. It's a limited resource that gets depleted throughout the day. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every choice you force yourself to make draws from the same mental energy pool. By the end of the day, you have almost no willpower left. But environmental cues bypass willpower entirely. They trigger automatic behaviors without requiring conscious decision-making. The goal isn't to build stronger willpower. It's to need less willpower by making good choices automatic. I learned this lesson when I was trying to eat healthier. For months, I relied on willpower to resist junk food. I'd do well during the day, but by evening my willpower was depleted, and I'd find myself eating whatever was easiest to access. The problem wasn't my lack of discipline, it was my environment. The solution was simple but powerful. I removed all junk food from my house and placed healthy snacks in the exact spots where I used to keep the unhealthy ones. I prepared cut vegetables and put them at eye level in my refrigerator. I moved the fruit bowl to the center of my kitchen counter. Within a week, my eating habits changed dramatically without any additional willpower required. When I was hungry, healthy food was simply the most convenient option. My environment was recommending better choices automatically. The same principle applies to every habit you want to develop. Want to exercise more? Place your workout clothes on your bed so you have to move them to go to sleep. Want to read more? Put books everywhere you used to keep your phone. Want to drink more water? Place filled water bottles in every room. The key is understanding that every physical object in your environment is either voting for your good habits or your bad habits. A bag of chips on your counter is voting for poor eating choices. A book on your nightstand is voting for reading instead of scrolling your phone before bed. But environmental design goes beyond just physical objects. It includes digital environments too. The apps on your phone's home screen influence your behavior. The websites bookmarked in your browser shape your online habits. The notifications you allow determine what captures your attention throughout the day. I transformed my digital environment by removing social media apps from my phone and replacing them with educational apps. I changed my browser homepage from news sites to learning platforms. I turned off all non-essential notifications so my attention wasn't constantly hijacked by meaningless alerts. The result was that productive behaviors became as automatic as destructive ones used to be. Instead of mindlessly scrolling social media, I mindlessly opened language learning apps. Instead of browsing news sites, I automatically visited educational content. Environmental design is so powerful because it works with your brain's natural tendency to take the path of least resistance. You don't have to become a different person with superhuman willpower. You just have to become a better architect of your surroundings. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it compounds over time. Each positive environmental change makes the next one easier to implement. As your surroundings increasingly support your goals, maintaining good habits requires less and less conscious effort. But here's the advanced insight. You can also engineer social environments, not just physical ones. The people you spend time with, the conversations you engage in, and the communities you join all function as environmental cues that influence your behavior. If you want to develop better habits, start spending time with people who already have those habits. Their behaviors will become environmental cues that make your desired behaviors feel more natural and automatic. Your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, whether you realize it or not. The question is whether you're going to design it intentionally or let it design you by accident. The next strategy will show you how to cut through the noise of competing priorities and focus your energy on what actually matters. Using a system, borrowed from emergency medicine. Part 5. The Life Crisis. Priority Matrix. Picture this. You're in an emergency room, and 3 patients arrive at the same time. One is screaming in pain from a broken arm, another is quietly having a heart attack, and the third has a minor cut that's bleeding dramatically. Which patient do you treat first? If you're like most people, you'd be drawn to the loudest patient or the most visually dramatic injury. But emergency room doctors know better. They use a system called triage that prioritizes patients based on the severity of their condition, not the volume of their complaints. This 5th technique, out of 7 life-changing strategies, will teach you how to apply emergency room triage to your personal problems, separating urgent feelings from actually important issues so you can focus your energy where it will have the most impact on your life trajectory. Most people live their lives like that chaotic emergency room, responding to whatever problem is making the most noise, rather than addressing what's actually most critical. They put band-aids on paper cuts, while ignoring internal bleeding in other areas of their lives. Your problems don't organize themselves by importance. The most emotionally intense issues often have the least long-term impact, while the most life-altering issues sometimes whisper quietly in the background. Learning to distinguish between emotional noise and actual importance is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. I discovered this the hard way when I was overwhelmed by seemingly urgent problems that were actually minor inconveniences. My car needed repairs, a friend was upset with me, my apartment was messy, and I had a presentation coming up at work. All of these felt equally urgent and important in the moment. But when I applied the triage system, everything became clear. The friend issue was high emotional noise, but low life impact. The messy apartment was medium noise and low impact. The car repairs were low noise, but medium impact, since I needed transportation for work. The presentation was medium noise, but high impact, because it could affect my career trajectory. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, or responding to whatever felt most urgent, I addressed them in order of actual life impact. I prepared thoroughly for the presentation first, scheduled the car repairs second, cleaned my apartment third, and addressed the friend situation last. The result was transformative. By focusing on high-impact issues first, I prevented small problems from becoming big ones. The presentation went well, which improved my standing at work. The car got fixed before it broke down completely. The other issues resolved themselves more easily because I wasn't stressed and overwhelmed. Here's how the triage system works for personal problems. Every issue gets rated on 2 separate scales: emotional noise level and actual life impact. Emotional noise is how much mental energy the problem consumes, how often you think about it, and how intensely it affects your mood. Life impact is how much the problem actually affects your long-term trajectory, relationships, health, or goals. High noise, low impact problems are things like social media drama, minor inconveniences or temporary setbacks that feel overwhelming, but don't actually change your life direction. These problems demand attention, but don't deserve priority. Low noise, high impact problems are things like declining health habits, deteriorating important relationships, or career stagnation. These problems don't scream for attention, but gradually erode your life quality if ignored. The goal isn't to ignore emotional noise completely, but to address high-impact issues first, regardless of how loudly they're demanding attention. This prevents you from spending all your energy on urgent but unimportant problems while neglecting important but non-urgent ones. Most people do the opposite. They respond to whatever feels most pressing in the moment, which usually means addressing high-noise, low-impact problems, while important issues get worse in the background. When you flip this priority system, your life starts improving in ways that compound over time. Addressing high-impact issues early prevents them from becoming crisis situations later. You spend your energy solving problems that actually matter instead of just managing emotional reactions. The triage system also helps you recognize when you're creating artificial urgency around low-impact issues. Sometimes we unconsciously amplify minor problems because they're easier to solve than important ones. It feels productive to fix small, manageable issues while avoiding big, complex challenges. But this creates an illusion of progress without actual improvement. You stay busy solving unimportant problems, while important areas of your life slowly deteriorate. The next time you feel overwhelmed by multiple problems, step back and apply the triage system. Rate each issue honestly on both emotional noise and life impact. Then address them in order of actual importance, not emotional intensity. This system doesn't just help you solve problems more effectively. It also reduces anxiety by giving you a clear framework for decision-making. When you know you're working on the most important issues first, you can feel confident about your priorities, even when other problems are demanding attention. The next technique will show you how to predict and prevent your biggest challenges before they become problems, using pattern recognition to turn your personal struggles into predictable, manageable events. Part 6. Pattern recognition for personal demons. Every video game boss seems impossible until you recognize their attack pattern. The dragon that seemed unbeatable becomes routine once you realize it always breathes fire after roaring, charges after breathing fire, and becomes vulnerable after charging. The pattern makes the unpredictable predictable and the overwhelming manageable. Your personal struggles follow the exact same principle, but most people never step back far enough to see the pattern. They experience each destructive episode as a random, unstoppable force instead of recognizing the predictable sequence that leads to every breakdown. This 6th technique out of 7 transformative strategies will teach you how to map your personal attack patterns so you can predict and interrupt your most destructive moments before they gain momentum. Self-destructive episodes feel random and overwhelming because you're experiencing them from the inside. It's like being in the middle of a storm and trying to predict the weather. But when you step back and track the patterns, you'll discover that your personal storms are far more predictable than you think. I learned this lesson during a particularly rough period when I kept sabotaging important opportunities. I'd get close to success in a relationship, career opportunity, or personal goal, then mysteriously find ways to undermine myself. It felt like some invisible force was working against me. That's when I started treating my self-destructive patterns like a video game boss I needed to defeat. Instead of getting caught up in the emotional drama of each episode, I began studying them like a scientist, studying a natural phenomenon. The first step was recognizing that destructive patterns aren't single events, they're sequences. Just like a video game boss has a wind-up phase before the attack, your destructive behaviors have predictable triggers and escalation patterns that happen before the main event. I started tracking my self-sabotage episodes by noting 5 key elements: the time and location, my emotional state beforehand, what had happened in the previous 2 hours, any physical factors like sleep or hunger, and the specific trigger that seemed to initiate the destructive behavior. After tracking just 3 episodes, the pattern became crystal clear. My self-sabotage always happened in the evening, when I was alone, after a day of high achievement or positive feedback, when I was tired but not sleepy, and it was always triggered by comparing myself to others on social media. The pattern was so predictable it was almost embarrassing. Every time I had a good day and felt proud of my progress, I would unconsciously seek out reasons to feel inadequate by scrolling through other people's highlight reels. This would trigger a shame spiral that led to self-destructive behaviors, designed to bring me back down to my familiar comfort zone. Once I could see the pattern, interrupting it became straightforward. I recognized that the real battle wasn't against the destructive behavior itself, but against the much earlier triggers in the sequence. By the time I was engaging in self-sabotage, the pattern was already too advanced to stop easily. The key insight was learning to recognize the pattern in its earliest, weakest phase. Instead of trying to stop myself from self-sabotaging, when I was already in an emotional spiral, I learned to recognize the warning signs hours earlier and interrupt the sequence before it gained momentum. Now, when I have a particularly good day, I'm aware that I'm entering a high-risk period for self-sabotage. I avoid social media in the evening. I plan engaging activities that don't leave room for destructive behaviors. And I go to bed earlier to avoid the tired but not sleepy state that made me vulnerable. This approach works because you're no longer trying to overpower destructive urges at their strongest point. Instead, you're interrupting them at their weakest point before they build momentum. It's like stopping a snowball at the top of the hill, instead of trying to stop an avalanche at the bottom. The pattern recognition technique applies to any recurring personal struggle. Procrastination patterns, relationship conflicts, anxiety episodes, addictive behaviors, and emotional breakdowns all follow predictable sequences that you can learn to recognize and interrupt. The key is shifting from a reactive mindset to a detective mindset. Instead of getting swept away by the intensity of each episode, you become curious about the underlying pattern. What are the common elements? What are the early warning signs? Where is the pattern most vulnerable to interruption? Most people only pay attention to their problems when they're at peak intensity, which is like trying to understand a movie by only watching the climactic scenes. You miss all the setup that makes the climax inevitable. But when you start tracking the full sequence, you'll discover that your biggest problems announce themselves well in advance. Your brain is constantly giving you early warning signals that you've learned to ignore or misinterpret. Depression episodes are preceded by specific thought patterns and behaviors. Anxiety attacks follow predictable triggers and escalation sequences. Relationship conflicts usually start with the same underlying issues and follow similar escalation patterns. Once you can predict your patterns, you can prevent them. You transform from someone who gets blindsided by their own behavior into someone who sees problems coming and takes preventive action. This final strategy brings us to the most important principle of all: how small, daily actions compound into massive life changes when they're aligned with your evolving identity. Part 7. The 1% Daily Identity Investment. Here's something that might surprise you. The person you are today isn't fixed or permanent. Your identity is actually more flexible than you think, and it's constantly being shaped by the smallest actions you take every single day. Most people try to change their behaviors while keeping the same identity, which is why they struggle. But when you flip the approach and focus on changing your identity through tiny daily actions, behavior change becomes almost effortless. This seventh and final technique is the foundation that makes all the other strategies sustainable long-term. Without this piece, you might see temporary improvements, but you won't create lasting transformation. Traditional approaches to change focus on what you want to do differently. They tell you to set goals, create action plans, and use willpower to force new behaviors. But they miss the most important element: who you believe you are. Your identity is like a thermostat for your behavior. Just like a thermostat keeps your house at a consistent temperature, regardless of outside conditions, your identity keeps your behavior consistent with your self-concept, regardless of external circumstances. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with consistency, you'll unconsciously sabotage your own efforts to be consistent. If you see yourself as someone who's bad with money, you'll find ways to confirm that belief through your financial decisions. If you see yourself as someone who can't stick to healthy habits, you'll abandon exercise programs and diets even when they're working. The breakthrough happens when you realize that identity isn't something you discover, it's something you create through your daily choices. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you're becoming. The more votes you cast for a particular identity, the stronger that identity becomes. This is why tiny habits are so powerful. It's not because small actions create small results that add up over time, though that's part of it. It's because small actions are easy to repeat consistently, and consistent actions shape identity faster than dramatic actions you can only maintain briefly. When I decided I wanted to become a writer, I didn't start by trying to write for hours every day. Instead, I committed to writing one sentence every morning. Just one sentence, no matter how busy I was or how uninspired I felt. That single sentence became a daily vote for my identity as a writer. After a few weeks, I started thinking of myself as someone who writes every day. After a few months, writing felt like a natural part of who I was rather than something I had to force myself to do. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it works with your brain's natural tendency to maintain consistency with your self-concept. Once you start seeing yourself as a certain type of person, you naturally want to act in ways that confirm that identity. This is the opposite of how most people approach change. They wait until they feel motivated to take action, then they try to maintain that action through willpower. But motivation is temporary and willpower is limited. Identity, on the other hand, is self-reinforcing and sustainable. The key is starting with actions so small they feel almost insignificant. If you want to become someone who exercises regularly, don't commit to hour-long gym sessions. Commit to putting on your workout clothes every day. If you want to become someone who reads regularly, don't commit to reading for an hour. Commit to reading 1 page. These micro-commitments work because they're below the threshold of resistance. They're so small that you can't fail, which means you'll actually do them consistently. And consistency is what shapes identity. Most people sabotage themselves by choosing commitments that are too ambitious. They want to see dramatic results quickly, so they make dramatic commitments they can't sustain. When they inevitably fail to maintain those commitments, they reinforce their old identity as someone who can't stick to things. But when you make micro-commitments you can easily maintain, you start building evidence that you're the type of person who keeps their word to themselves. This builds confidence and momentum that makes larger commitments feel natural and achievable. The identity approach also explains why external motivation doesn't create lasting change. When your motivation comes from outside sources like other people's expectations or external rewards, you're still operating from your old identity. You're just temporarily overriding it with external pressure. But when your motivation comes from identity alignment, it's sustainable because it comes from within. You're not forcing yourself to act differently. You're acting in accordance with who you believe you are. The fastest way to change your identity is to complete this sentence. I am the type of person who... Then identify the smallest daily action that type of person would definitely do, and commit to that action for 1 week. If you want to be healthy, what's the smallest daily action a healthy person would definitely do? If you want to be organized, what's the smallest daily action an organized person would definitely do? If you want to be successful, what's the smallest daily action a successful person would definitely do? The answer should be so small that it feels almost silly not to do it. That's how you know you've found the right starting point. Remember, you're not trying to create massive change immediately. You're trying to cast daily votes for the person you're becoming. Each small action is evidence that supports your new identity. The more evidence you accumulate, the stronger that identity becomes. This approach works because it addresses the root cause of behavioral inconsistency: identity conflict. When your actions align with your identity, maintaining them becomes automatic. When your actions conflict with your identity, maintaining them requires constant effort. These 7 techniques have the power to completely transform your relationship with yourself and your capacity for positive change, but only if you actually implement them. The philosophy that saved me from self-destruction wasn't just about understanding these principles intellectually. It was about putting them into practice consistently until they became automatic. The beauty of these strategies is that they work together synergistically. When you redirect destructive energy instead of fighting it, build solutions instead of analyzing problems, focus your efforts where you have real power, engineer your environment to support good choices, prioritize based on actual importance rather than emotional intensity, predict and prevent your destructive patterns, and align your daily actions with your desired identity, you create a comprehensive system for sustainable transformation. But here's what I want you to understand. You don't need to implement all 7 techniques at once. In fact, trying to do everything simultaneously is exactly the kind of mistake that leads to overwhelm and eventual abandonment of the entire system. Start with just one technique that resonates most strongly with you right now. Master that single approach until it becomes automatic. Then, gradually incorporate the others. This isn't about perfection. It's about progress and consistency. The philosophy that saved my life came down to one simple realization. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are powerful and in need of direction. These techniques aren't about becoming a different person. They're about becoming the person you already have the potential to be. Your transformation starts with your very next action. Choose one technique, identify the smallest possible first step, and take that step today. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. The person you're capable of becoming is waiting for you to start building toward them. One small action at a time.